Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi. Avodah Zarah Daf Mem Hey, we begin right on top of the Mishnah. So, as we have learned, Avodah Zarah materials are asur bahano. One may not benefit from any object, any item which was worshipped as an Avodah Zarah. Now, what happens if a guy worships a mountain, a hill, a tree? Says the Mishnah, something which is mechubar lekarka, something which is a totally natural phenomenon, will not be impacted by his worship, will not become asur bahano. So, for instance, hanachrim, the goyim ha'ovdim mesaharim, they worship the mountains, vesagvois, and the hills. Hein mutarin. So, although it is considered idol worship, as we're going to see tomorrow, Bezus Hashem, the guy who worships in this manner has committed Avodah Zarah and is liable to the penalties incurred therein. He's put to death. There's Saif, there's Misa. It's one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, Avodah Zarah, right? So certainly it's considered an act of worship on account of the person, but the item, the object, in this case a mountain, will remain unaffected by this activity. Hanochrim ha'ovdim hasaharim, vesagvois, they worship the mountains, the hills, hein mutarin. So those landmarks stay permissible, unaffected by this activity. As we're going to see in a minute, it's based on a pasuk. But here comes an interesting point. The mountains are okay, umashal and asurin, but the items, the adornments, Rashi says, they coated the mountain with gold, silver. It is asurin. They become asur because they are considered an adornment, a beautification to the Avodah Zarah. So although the Avodah Zarah itself is unaffected, but the adornment of it, since it's not mechubar lekarka, it's something which is man-made, which is attached to it, those are asurin shenemar, as the pasuk says, lo sachmoid kesev v'zav aleim. Don't have any interest in that gold and silver on top of them. So even the mountains, which themselves are unaffected, but anything which is put upon them, adornments, etc., become asur. But basically, the Omer, I'll explain to you this whole concept to you based on the psukim. How is it that an idol, a statue, becomes asur, but not these mountains? Rabbi Gosei Omer, because the pasuk in describing their idols says like this: Eloyehem alaharim, their gods are sitting on top of the mountains, indicating that the mountain itself can never be really considered Avodah Zarah. V'loi, so we learn from here, v'loi haharim Eloheim, but the mountains themselves are not considered Eloheim. Likewise, the pasuk says you'll find the idols on the mountains, on the hills, alagvois. So we learn Eloheim alagvois. Yeah, you'll find them on top of the hills, but the hill itself will never be considered Avodah Zarah with respect to becoming asur. V'loi hagvois Eloheim. So from here we learn that all these natural phenomena, these mountains, these hills, which are mechubar lekarka, will remain unaffected, will not be impacted by this idol worship. Now, the question is, what about an Asherah tree? Right, so the Goyim would consider this tree to be sacred. They would plant it for the sake of Avodah Zarah, to worship it, and it is considered an item of Avodah Zarah, which is asur. But the pasuk, in describing the locations of their Avodah Zarah, right, tells you it's on top of the mountains, top of the hills, which indicate that the mountain and the hills are never going to be considered truly Avodah Zarah. They don't become affected by this type of conduct towards them. But there's another pasuk that seems to say the same regarding trees. It's actually the same pasuk. It says, Eloheim alaharim, balagvois, v'sachat kol ranan, and beneath this leafy tree. Perhaps we can infer from here that only an idol placed beneath a tree is really considered. But the tree itself, since it's a naturally occurring phenomena, it's b'chubar l'karka, a tree growing, that will not become Avodah Zarah and not become forbidden. So that begs the question, umipnei ma ashera asura. So why do we consider the Asherah to be asur? The pasuk which says, destroy the Asherah, burn the Asherah tree. The answer is, because apparently this is in a different category than the mountains and the hills. Because in contrast to mountains and hills, which are not created by people, trees are. And we are speaking about a tree which did have some element of human intervention. There's human involvement in planting the tree, etc. And anything which came about through human efforts, asur. That in fact becomes asur when you worship it. So we have this distinction between the mountains and the hills, which remain mutter, and the tree, which becomes asur. Rabbi Akiva, he says, based on this kasha, meaning this apparent conflict between how we treat the mountains and the hills versus the trees, which are all really natural phenomena, I'm going to conclude that the pasuk is not meant to be learned the way you did, the way you interpreted the pasuk, because in that case you're left with a question. Only an idol beneath the tree is asur, but the tree itself should remain mutter. Therefore, says Rabbi Akiva, I don't think the pasuk is really coming to teach you that the mountain, the hill, and the tree is exempt. The pasuk is simply trying to give you a pointer, a tip. Where do we locate? Where do we find idols in order to destroy them? Let me explain and present before you. The pasuk is simply giving you tips where to find the Avodah Zarah. Look, you see a tall mountain, Nisa, and this impressive hill, or this impressive looking leafy tree. Oh, that's the address. You should know. Chances are you'll find an idol there. So that answers the question. The pasuk is not trying to exempt these things in this pasuk. So rest assured, a tree can become asur if it's worshipped. Now, even Rabbi Akiva agrees that in contrast to the tree which becomes asur, certainly that doesn't apply to a mountain or a hill. Well, if we have no pasuk to exempt them and to keep them permissible, so how do you know, in fact, that they're unaffected by? So Rashi says, because if you look at the psukim, the Torah is only instructing Bnei Yisrael to destroy the trees. Ashereim tisrafum ba'esh, destroy the Asherah tree, indicating that otherwise the other landmarks or items discussed, the mountains and the hills, need not be destroyed because they're not affected, they're not impacted by this type of worship. So bottom line is, all agree generally to the halacha that a mountain, a hill is unaffected, and that an Asherah tree, due to the fact that there's human involvement, that's very different than the other items that is affected by the worshipping and does become asur. It's more or less a question of sourcing and other nuances, as we're going to see in the Gemara. So bottom line is, we have the Mishnah with three Tanoim, Tanakama, Rabbi Aglili, who's pretty much confirming what the Tanakama said, that the mountains, the hills are unaffected, but the trees are. And we have Rabbi Akiva presenting a third opinion. As the Gemara, Rabbi Aglili, which is the second opinion, Hani Tanakama, it seems like he's merely repeating. It's a repetition of the first sheet on the Mishnah. He's not really saying anything new. There is a slight difference. Tzipoy har. What about the adornments on the mountains? The tzipoy, the covering of the mountains, the plating, the gold plate, the silver plate they paste on the mountain. Kehar, is it treated like the actual mountain and is exempt from this isur? That's the question. That's the point of contention. Tanakama Sarah, tzipoy har enu kehar. Tanakama says, although mountain is exempt, but not the tzipoy. That's an adornment, that's asur. Umitzar, and if it's worshipped, if the mountain is worshipped, although the mountain stays free of isur, but the tzipui, the accompanying, adornments, become asur. Rabbi Yitzchak Lili Savar, he disagrees. Savar tzipui harka harayu kahar, just like the mountain remains permissible, so does the tzipui, because as Rashi says, it's batal to the mountain. It's not an entity on its own. So if the mountain remains exempt and unaffected, certainly the tzipui, which is part of the mountain, which is just serving the mountain. Whereas the Tanakama, who quoted the pasuk lo'isachmod kesev v'zav aleim, indicated to us that any gold and silver, even on those mountains, will become asr. Okay, so he holds tzipui har eino kahar, and he holds tzipui har harayu kahar. Rav Sheshes Amar, no, the Kuli Alma, tzipui har eino kahar, all would agree that the tzipui, the gold and silver, is not in the same boat as the mountain, which means to say, although the mountain remains mutter, but the adornments become asr. So what's the point of difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yitzchak Lili? Let's shift to the tree, to the Asherah tree, this sort of sacred tree. So all would agree that if the Asherah was planted for the sake of worshipping it, it was created for this purpose, it was manufactured for the Avodah Zarah purpose, all agree. If it's worshipped, it becomes asr. The question is, let's say it was planted for other reasons, for benign, innocent reasons, and then later on, once it's up in the air, he decided to bow to it, to turn it into an Avodah Zarah. Interesting question, right? Because there is human intervention, but when there was human intervention, it wasn't for this sake. It wasn't with this objective in mind. He was not creating an Avodah Zarah while planting. That happened later. So that would be the machlekes. Does the tree become asur or not? Here we're speaking be'ilan shenatoi. It was initially planted not for the sake of Asherah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, and later on was worshipped. That's the point of disagreement. Tanakama Savar, first sheet holds. Well, if it wasn't done with this in mind, it's like any other naturally occurring phenomenon, like a hill, like a mountain, and remains exempt and resistant to this type of conduct towards that tree. Tanakama Savar Ilan Shanatoi L'Basayf Avdoi was just planted for other reasons, and then later decided to they converted it into Avodah Zarah mutter. It remains mutter. Rabbi Yitzchak Lili Savar, he holds no. Just like an initially a tree which was initially planted for Avodah Zarah is considered an Asherah. Likewise, he holds Savar Ilan Shanatoi L'Basayf Avdoi, even though it was only worshipped later, it was converted later into Avodah Zarah. Asur remains asur. How do we know, in fact, that that's what he holds? How do we know? Look at his words. Megtani safe. Take a look at Rabbi Yitzchak Lili's, tail end of his presentation. He says, so why is an Asherah different than a hill and a mountain? He says the other, because there's human involvement. And he repeats himself. And we know that there's no extra words in the Mishnah. So a repetition indicates an additional twist, right? So he repeats and he says, and you should know, in conclusion, right? Anything which featured human intervention, which is somewhat man-made, is asr. Why this repetition? What's he coming to include? He's coming to cover another phenomenon, another aspect of this tree. To cover what? We're assuming that he's covering this case. One which was planted for benign purposes and then converted into Avodah Zarah. Since there is somewhat of a human element, that will be sufficient to turn it into Isra Avodah Zarah. There's another shita as well that is in line with this opinion. Savar, he holds Ilan Shanatoi. A tree was initially planted for innocent reasons, and then converted into Avodah Zarah. Asur becomes Asur. The Sani, we have a brayso. We say B'doimer Tershan Never. Take a look at the pasuk, which says Elohim Alaharim. Their gods are perched on the mountains, and we learn from there. The mountains themselves remain unaffected. V'lo Yaharim, their mountains are not considered Elohim. Likewise with the hills, Elohim Alagvois. Yeah, they may perch their idols and statues on the hills. So the statues are their gods. V'lo Yagvois Elohim, but their hills themselves do not turn into idols. So I would think the same, analogy should apply to the trees, right? Beneath the trees, you find their idols, but the tree itself remains resilient. Shemiani, perhaps I can take it a step further. Tachas Ranam. Elohim, their gods are beneath the trees. V'loi Eitz Ranan Elihem, but the trees themselves remain resistant. Talmud Leimar. To counter that notion, we have another pasuk which clearly calls out those trees. Vasherehem. What do you do with those trees? Tisrafum ba'esh, burn them. Okay, so apparently a tree is affected because, as we explained, it is somewhat man-made, right? Ela tachas kol eitz ranan lamali. So what's the pasuk? Pointed to something beneath the tree. The tree itself is also us. Well, the Rekiva, the us that's coming for Rekiva's point, it's just a matter of showing us and directing us to the right locations, where to find their idols. Look at the Rekiva, the us, the Rekiva, the Oivin, right? That was the Mishnah, the Oivin, V'adna Fanecha. I'll present before you, I'll explain to the pasuk. It's just about tipping us on locations. V'giva, Nisa, it's not Rana, wherever you find these impressive landmarks, Da. You should look into it, you should know, certainly there's an Avodah Zarah there. Okay, so bottom line is, we had one shayla regarding Tzipoy Har. Is it considered like the mountain, which is mutter, or is it a separate entity and it becomes asr? Now we had a shayla regarding a tree. So if it was initially planted for Avodah Zarah purposes and then worshipped, of course it's asr. But if it was planted shaloi l'shem asherah and then it was converted into an asherah and then worshipped, so that triggers this shayla, this question as to how to treat the new growth. Certainly the part of the tree that was there before they converted it would not become affected, but the new growth, the future growth, after they worship, after they bow to it, what happens to that? So we have Tanakama, who seems to say it's okay because it wasn't made for this purpose, whereas Rabbi Glili and likewise Rabbi Yehuda disagree. Since there's an element of mankind in there, right? It was actually planted by a person, so now it's susceptible to his conduct. At least going forward, the new growth would be us. Now, the Shittas who disagree, who hold that in this case, since it was not planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah, the tree will remain immune, Rabbanan. So what do I do with this pasuk that we just quoted, which seems to say otherwise? Rabbanan hayva sherem tisrufum be'esh me'abdelei. What do I do with this pasuk? They have to burn the tree. Well, that's for the basic Asherah, which was planted for the sake of Asherah, right? It's needed a tree that was planted for Asherah purposes, which everybody would agree that it's us. Okay, so now back to the other shita. Where's his source for this additional chiddush? This type 2 tree. For Rabbi Yehuda, he also needs the pasuk for the basic halacha, the basic tree. So how does he know that the type tree, that's the tree that was not planted for Avodah Zarah, only converted later? How do we know that's asr? Chanami, you're right. He needs it for the basic tree. Ella, rather, ilan shenatay u'basoif of the minoli. So how does he know about type 2? Nafkali, that's another pasuk. Meve'asherem tigadayun. It's a different pasuk. Chop down, bang down the tree. Now, what type of situation requires us to just trim the tree, to trim it of its new growth that came about after it was worshipped? So we're not speaking about eradicating the entire tree, just part of it. Why? Apparently that's type B, which only requires partial destruction, the part that grew after being worshipped. Ezeu eitz shegedu asur. Give me a tree. Give me an example of an eitz whose new growth is asur. V'ikroi mutar, but the base remains permissible. Apparently that's type B, ilan shenata, which was planted for benign reasons, and ultimately it was worshipped. So according to this opinion, we have in fact two psukim. Vasherem tisr from ba'esh, totally destroy the tree, that's type A. Vasherem tigadiyun, partially destroy, that's type B. Ask the Gemara, but if you look back at that brisa, where he brought the pasuk of total destruction, seemingly to prove type B. That's a mismatch, right? Vasherem tisr from ba'esh. He brought the pasuk indicating total destruction to support type B, which is partial destruction. Nasala Tamuda. Says the Gemara, although the Gemara, the Brisa, did quote this pasuk, but it was to make a point. If not for the fact that there is this pasuk, meaning like this, if the pasuk would not repeat itself and add this point of total destruction, so then I would only have one pasuk, which speaks about Tigadayun, chop it down, You say, yeah, that pasuk, Asherem Tegadayun, if there would only be one pasuk, which says Vasherem Tegadayun, I would have to apply it to the basic type A tree. A tree which was planted with this in mind. And that one you destroy. But there's no source for type B. But sure enough, the Torah does repeat itself to provide a source for both trees. But now that we have the pasuk of total destruction, which presumably is going on the tree which needs to be totally destroyed, meaning type A tree. Oh, so now we have that extra pasuk, we have that pasuk extra, Vasherem Tegadayun, and we're going to interpret it to be a reference to partial destruction, referring to the tree, type B tree, which requires only partial destruction. Le'ilan shenata, which was planted for innocent reasons, and then worshipped. Now back to the other shita, who hold that only type A is destroyed, not type B. V'Rabbanan, right? The other opinions. Hi, Vasherem Tegadayun. So what about the second pasuk? What did they do with this pasuk? The answer is to teach us a totally different concept regarding the order of priorities when our nation entered Eretz Yisrael. The question was, what do we do first? Destroy Avodah Zarah, conquer the land, right? Look at Rabbi Shimon Levi. Rabbi Shimon Levi. Giduy Avodas Kechavim, Koidmin L'Kivish Eretz Yisrael. So they encountered these sacred trees. What do? We uproot it completely. That's a big job, right? Perhaps we have to conquer the land first. So the answer is sort of a compromise. Gidui Avodas Kechavim, sort of a superficial chop down and destruction of the Avodah Zarah materials. That has to be done immediately, and that precedes Koidmin L'Kibush, to the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. And then that's enough for the meantime. They proceed to conquer Kibush Eretz Yisrael, the conquering of the land. Kodim l'bir Avodas Kechavim comes before total destruction. So first they do a sort of a superficial smash, chop down, go take care of land, come back and totally eradicate any remnant of this idol. The Torah Rav Yosef, as we find Rav Yosef as well, who speaks about the altars, the netastim, destroy, smash down, esm b'choisam, v'hanach, but just leave it as is. And break their monuments, but leave it as is. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Leave it as is. These are Avodah Zarah materials. They must be carted away and destroyed. V'hanach, how could you just leave them as is? Sakadat, how could you suggest that? Streifa boy, it needs to be burnt and destroyed. In the meantime, the Bach adds the word hanach. Hanach. So first make a sort of a initial destruction. Leave it alone. Leave the remnants alone. Rudaif. Chase away the nations, conquer the land, and then totally destroy and eradicate and burn. So Rabbi Yehuda already learned the pasuk of Asherem Tegadayun. For the other type of tree, so it was used for that. It's unavailable to teach us this new lesson. And the truth is, Rav Yosef, although he referred to the pasuk about the mizbeach and the mitzvah, but as Rashi explains, he too was based on the fact that we have two psukim about the Asherah, one indicating total destruction, one indicating partial destruction. So he figured, okay, it must be in sort of in order of priority. First comes partial destruction, then we conquer, then we totally eradicate. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, the two psukim by Asherah tree are totally counted for. They're used up for the halacha that he taught us, that there are different types of destruction pertaining to different types of trees. So according to Rabbi Yisrael, how does he know about this order of sequence, order of priority, when our nation entered Israel? Here's another pasuk, Abed ta'abdon, which seems to be a repetitious pasuk. Abed, first make the initial act of destruction, then when you have time, when you're done conquering the land, come back and finish the job ta'abdon. Now the Rabbanan, what do they do with this pasuk, which seems to be an extra pasuk now? That comes to tell you that when you destroy Avodah Zarah, it's not enough to just demolish and break. You have to totally obliterate any remnant of the Avodah Zarah, any foundation, any roots, anything, totally destroy it. Has Rabbi Yehuda know this concept? Nafkle, he has another pasuk. Obliterate their name, any remembrance, any impression of the Avodah Zarah from that location. Total destruction. V'Rabbanan. Okay, so the Rabbanan, what do they do with this pasuk? That pasuk is coming to tell you a new idea. Lekanis l'Shem. That when you reference the idols, you have to give it an insulting name. The Sanya, as we find in the Brisa, Rabbi Lezer Omer. Rabbi Lezer teaches us, Minayin lo ikar v'tzkichavim shetzarech l'shar shachareh. First of all, when you destroy Avodah Zarah, how do you know you want to obliterate it entirely? Tamalayim v'atam shmam, no remnants, nothing left. Amar Rabbi Akiva responded, that's from a different pasuk. V'alei kvar nemar already says, Abei to Abda. Total obliteration. So why do we need this additional pasuk? To give it an insulting nickname. Lekanis l'Shem. So Yochel l'Shvach, perhaps, to give it an enhanced, more honorable name than it had before. How could you suggest that? Like l'Shvach sakadaitach? Why would you think that? Ela Yochel. No. So perhaps it just means not honorable mention, nor in a ridiculing fashion. Maybe just something, neutral. Perhaps the new name should be nor positive nor negative. No. We have another pasuk. We have to totally degrade anything related to Avodah Zarah. Okay, so back to our question. In terms of renaming it, how do we do that? Apparently, we do it in an insulting, degrading way. Okay, for example, if the Avodah Zarah was called Beis Galia, which Rashi learns, Galia is Lashon Goiva, elevated, on high. So we rename it, so we call it Beis Karya. Rashi says Beis Karya means Chafira v'shiflis, down in the pit, right, below. So we sort of bring it down. If it's called Ein Koil, everybody's, eye, right, indicating brightness and wisdom, we rename it Ein Kaitz. Kaitz is like a thorn. So basically, we want to find a way to refer to it in a ridiculing and insulting manner. Okay, so regarding the mountains and the hills, all agree, although the guy who worshipped gets his punishment, but the item, the object, the landmark itself is unaffected, remains mutter. What about the adornments on the mountain? That was a machlekes. What about the trees, Asherah trees? So if it's a totally naturally occurring tree, you walk into a forest and it's just a tree which was not planted by a person, all agree, that's like the mountain and the hill. It remains resilient to any sort of human behavior, as opposed to a tree which has tfisas the adam, which was planted by man. So if it was planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah, all agree, the worship of that tree affects its status. But if it was planted for, benign purposes, and then later on converted into Avodah Zarah and worshipped, what happens to the new growth, the new branches that came about after that point? We have a machlekes. Some hold that since the tree has an element of human involvement, it is susceptible to future worship and becomes asur, and it's based on the extra pasuk, Vasherem Tigadayun, whereas the other shita says no. Unless it was planted with this in mind, it remains like the mountain, like the hill, which is a naturally occurring landmark, mechubar l'karka, which remains mutter. We have the halach of total obliteration and renaming it in an insulting manner. All the best to you and atzlach.